So our next panel is being moderated by Scott Rosner, Professor Scott Rosner. He's a professor of professional practice in the sports management program at Columbia of SPS. I don't think there are too many people at Columbia outside of the business school or maybe even inside the business school who know more about the business of sport more than Scott. So, Scott.
And John, I appreciate that. And so I'll welcome the panelists up to the stage. And we'll kind of go one by one. We were going to prepare, and I was thinking about walk-up music for everybody, but decided ultimately not to. And so I'll just bring everyone up. So Amit Sharma, Brett Abarbanel, Christina Chase, and Jorge Ortiz. If you could please come on up, and we'll get started there. All right, everyone. All right, so we are in effect the anchor leg today, and so want to do a very quick introduction of everybody. You see their bios really quickly up there. Amit Sharma is the CTO of Dream Sports, and that in his bio is just drop the mic moment. You go a little bit deeper, and also previous experience at Netflix, Yahoo, MBA from UMass Dartmouth, our ambassador, in computer science from UMass Dartmouth. Additional degree from Santa Clara, undergraduate from the University of Mumbai, and so welcome. Brett Abarbanel is executive director, Dr. Brett Abarbanel is executive director of UNLV International Gaming Institute, associate professor in UNLV's incredibly well-regarded Higher College of Hospitality, and an affiliate position at the University of Sydney Science Brain and Mind Center in the School of Psych. Does a lot of work around academically around video games, esports and gambling, sports betting, operations technology, responsible gambling, and community relations. By the way, I have friends who could use your help in probably all of those areas. And it sits on numerous boards and has done some really phenomenal work. Undergraduate from Brown University and MS and PhD from UNLV. Christina Chase is managing director and co-founder of the MIT Sports Lab, where she works with professional teams, global brands, elite sports organizations to tackle key questions at the intersection of data, sport, and engineering. Has appointments in the School of Engineering at MIT, where she teaches sports technology and innovation and entrepreneurship, and was the first EIR, Entrepreneur in Residence, at MIT, where she's helped hundreds of founders go from concept to company. Techstars mentor, South by Southwest accelerator judge, and an advisory board, former cyclist, has trained at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Springs, Colorado Springs, taught downhill skiing in Colorado, generally a badass. It's probably the best way to explain what Christine actually does. Christina actually does for a living. And then Jorge Ortiz is an assistant professor of electrical and computer engineering at Rutgers University. But I think, what I think the general population would think that what your side hustle is, in a way, is much cooler, is the AI team lead for baseball operations for the New York Yankees. Expertise, so right, it's like, oh, okay. And so expertise lies in sensing systems, interaction, and multimodal learning within heterogeneous, densely sensed environments, which are a lot of really big words for someone who teaches sports management, right? And has a phenomenal background. I look forward to the conversations with all. But Dr. Ortiz earned his MS and PhD in computer science from Berkeley, and his BS in computer science and engineering from MIT. Welcome to everyone. And like I said, my name, and like I was introduced so nicely by Shaw, my name is Scott Rosner. I lead the sports management program, which is over in the School of Professional Studies, MS degree granting program. And been here for 6 years. Prior to this, I was at the Wharton School for 15 plus years, helped lead the research and create and lead the research center there as well. So really excited for this conversation. I'm admittedly a AI neophyte. And so in a lot of ways, it represents what the sports industry as a whole and people on the practitioner side of the industry are involved in. So it's actually really helpful to have these conversations as we kind of try to bridge the gaps and as AI becomes more infused in the day to day. So with all of that said, and that preamble, I'll start with you. So let's talk about Dream Sports, right? And how is Dream Sports leveraging AI to enhance user experience and engagement in the fantasy sports realm?
Sure. I'll take some time actually. Before I talk about anything else, I really wanted to thank everyone for being here and like be kind of the host of Dream Sports. We want to stay throughout the day. I think the next few minutes is to explain who we are, what we are trying to actually do here, and but we're very proud to be associated with Columbia. I think Columbia's research abilities, access to faculty here for us, our industry experience, and the kind of investment that we actually wanted to make in the sports tech ecosystem. I think we can really solve a lot of fan problems out there today, right, in the sports ecosystem. And I think earlier in one of the panels today, I heard someone say that the amount of research in academia in the sports is not enough, right? Maybe some of the larger teams of the world got lots of money are like doing a much better job, but that's where we, with our Team Sports Foundation and among other things and these collaborations, we want to do a lot more. So who are we, right? So Dream Sports, our vision is like make sports better. It's simple. So we identify in the sports domain what are the problems that we can solve for fans, and we actually go ahead and do it. Our flagship product is Dream 11, which is a fantasy sports platform. It alone on its own, it has 220 million users today, and around 20 to 30 million of them actually play in the largest IPL, which is the largest cricket tournament in India. We also have Fanco, which is a content and merchandise platform where users can watch the tier 2, tier 3 content, which is probably not as popular for the masses. And then we have merchandise where we can, it's not in India, it's some of the things that I'll talk about today are a little bit nuanced because we serve the Indian market primarily. So sports merchandise is a lot more mature here, for example, in the States. But back in India, that's not the case. You look at an authentic sports jersey of a player that you want is not that easy. So Fanco provides the sports merchandise platform that you can go and buy the jerseys, customize it to your needs, etc. Then we also have an in-house gaming studio called as Dream Game Studio. So that's what we're saying is, so even today, cricket being one of the very popular games, there's no one AAA quality game, a mobile game for cricket anywhere. There are some of them out there, but the quality, if you compare it to the likes of the NFLs or FIFAs it's not there. Right? So we want to create something like that. What about sports travel? A lot of people want to go around the globe. People follow sports globally these days. How do we actually provide them the opportunity to actually identify the games that they want to go, give them behind the scenes experience? So DreamSet Go is our travel arm that actually does it. These are the various examples, and then the foundation that I spoke about. So that's who we are. When it comes to AI, I think our journey actually has been started a few years ago when we historically, if I look at it in two buckets, historically we've invested a lot in machine learning. So for example, some use cases would be demand forecasting. So an interesting thing about fantasy sports platform is a lot of users come to your system in a very short interval of time. So, for example, our peak concurrency is 15 million users are on the platform at the same time. And they're not there just to consume content. They're there to actually make, in our technical term, we call transactions. So they're there to create their teams or edit their teams. They're there to add money to their wallet. They're there to join different contests that exist on our platform. A contest join rate on our platform can go as high as 30,000 contest joins per second. So, so we need to be prepared to handle such volumes. So we need to pre-scale our system. So what is going to, we have to predict the user behavior and the expected users on the platform and have all our systems, because in real time, I don't have enough time because of the spiking nature of the platform. I don't have time to scale up my cloud platform. So I have to pre-scale my platforms. So that's where our demand forecasting actually comes in. It's a gaming app, so then we have to make sure that the integrity of the platform is maintained. So there's a lot of work that we do to make sure that there are machine learning algorithms that identify any kind of collusion between players, any violation of terms of service. So we're heavily invested in that. Personalization obviously is the key. I think all good apps around the world, I think end-to-end, and talk more about this maybe later, but then end-to-end user journey personalization, where it matches the contest that they join, the rewards for them, the payments instruments that they use, so we personalize those. And so that's historically, and all this, and what makes it a lot more complex is the scale at which we operate. As I said, 15 million concurrent users. All of these use cases become a lot more complex. We've also been investing heavily in causal inferencing over the last 1 year. Coming from like the company in the industry, I can tell you that making decisions is one of the is very difficult. I mean, you would think that today we have so much data analytics capabilities, so much data about our users, but even today we sit in the boardroom or sit in conference rooms and still struggle to make decisions. So that's where like all things like causal inference comes into the play, right? So it's like okay, directionally we are relying on like a lot. So the understanding the relationship between various metrics and variables to try to figure out what to prioritize, because just like everyone else, we also believe we have very limited people. I think most CPOs will tell you they don't have enough engineers, and I'm also like them. So I have to prioritize what to do. So that's where these decision-making capabilities come into the picture. Forward looking, we are very excited about GenAI. So we've done some prototypes, two tracks there. One is some prototypes to solve user problems, like help them create their teams using by looking at all the information that's available in the public sphere, and then bring it all together for a particular user. And on the productivity side, also we're trying to do a lot of things. We did a hackathon inside, not just focus on technology, but all functions. Okay, marketing, HR, finance, to bring. So I'm trying to bring everyone up to speed with what's the capability, what's the possibilities, and how to make them independent. So they're actually not reliant on tech teams and engineers, but they're on their own using these platforms. So yeah, a lot of work happening.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And if you had followed, if you played fantasy football for the NFL, you'll notice if you use the ESPN platform that they've started to incorporate something similar with Watson AI stuff and particularly Watson X stuff, and it's really interesting, right? I mean, it gives you comments on everything from is this the correct trade to make, and feedback that you'll receive on any trades they make or proposed trades, how good or bad your draft was in any particular year. Make game predictions obviously for each of the athletes' individual performance. So it's basically the Dream 11 application.
You can learn everyone. We also learn from that, and hopefully we want to that someday collaborate. But yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's fascinating. By the way, they think very highly of Scott Stott so far in the 2024 fantasy football season, just so you know. Brent, so you have done some fascinating work and really cool research. How do you see AI and data analytics shaping the future of sports betting and gaming, particularly in terms of responsible gambling practices?
Just like we've heard, yes, very good. Just like we've heard all day long. Okay. Right, it has changed every single facet of sports betting and gaming. And to clarify, because I'm going to use a whole bunch of different terms, and I think the different people on this panel will use a whole bunch of different terms. The very generic definition of gambling is risking something of value on an outcome that's uncertain. When we talk about legal gambling, the legal definition of gambling, that thing that you're risking and the prize you might win at the end, that's something of money or money's worth. So when we talk about gaming, that might be something that theoretically looks like gambling. But when we think about it under the law, it might be a better fit underneath the definition of gaming. So I want to make sure when I talk about betting and gaming, we're clear. All of this is in essence games of uncertain outcomes. It's just a matter of what the use of that game, what goes into that game, what are you risking, and what might you get out of it. Those are some of those other elements as well. I'll also talk about skill, I think, a little bit later, because that I think is a very interesting future use case of some of this. But collectively, within the area of betting and gaming, again, just about every single facet of this has some sort of impact from data science and in particular AI. So I'm only going to talk about a few briefly here. We can delve into others as the subjects come up. But I'm going to start with, of course, the subject that's on the screen behind me, which is fan engagement. One of the most important things to recognize about betting and gaming is just how much it has an impact as a whole on fan engagement. One of the best examples of this is to go all the way back now, I used to say the other year, now it's 9 years ago to 2015, when we first started seeing the true explosion of daily fantasy sports. We had, especially in North America, fantasy sports for a very long time. And we saw just how much it really got people engaged with new teams, with new leagues, and how that impact really helped foster new interest in these games, in these teams, in these leagues. With daily fantasy sport, we saw it at an even more granular level. Because as you start forming your teams and you pull players from various different parts of the league onto your particular team for that particular game, people stay longer. You're engaged through more of the game. I brought this up with some ESPN folks the other day, and one of them interrupted me and raised their hand and they said, we were so happy in the fall of 2015, again, in large part because of how this game of uncertainty, allowed players to stay involved, because it no longer matters if the game is a blowout. What it matters is individual performances, even within a team setting. So one of the ways that we're seeing AI show up now in this fan engagement setting in betting and gaming is particularly in the area of personalization. I know you wanted to get into that a little bit later, so I'll be broad on this now, which is this concept of taking the ability to place wagers, whether that's, again, betting or gaming, buying tickets versus buying a betting ticket, and providing the ability to cater that to each individual choice. Some of the lightning talks that we saw earlier looked at this. What contests do you want to promote to individuals? Because it might be a better fit to what that individual's interests are. We see this in areas of things like marketing tactics. We see it in terms of providing parlay bets that bring in multiple different areas of interest for individuals. We see it in bonusing. Are there areas that might be more of an incentive to place a wager versus others? Usually people like free money. This is not a phrase that you'll see permitted by too many regulatory agencies, but it's used all the time nonetheless, which makes this a particularly key area for use of analytics in a capacity to, again, cater to individual interests. Another major area of this is in the integrity of the game. We look for anomalies not just in gameplay, but also in suspicious betting patterns. Sometimes they're very obvious. So if you are, for example, a gambling operator and you see a ton of money come in on an amateur football game in Romania, real example, it's probably not going to be a particularly clean game. There's probably fraudulent activity there. And that's something that can very easily trigger activity. Something that gets a little bit more nuanced might be something like, for example, Christina and I were talking about earlier, which is tennis. Tennis went through major scandal about 9 years ago, and they had to completely revamp what these organizations looked like. What did their competitive scene look like? Because there was such a big betting-related scandal. So something that might be a little bit easier to tweak would be something like double faults. Double faults is a major area of fraudulent activity in tennis, and these can much more accurately be detected by an AI now than by individual activity. Some of these other areas in terms of kind of, moving more into this consumer protection and game protection space include areas like compliance. Betting and gaming are two areas that are extremely reliant for their framework on the regulations that create the framework in which they exist. Now we're going to pause for a moment and say, offshore and illegal activity, different story. But anything that fits within legalized frameworks has to fit within that legalized framework. If I were to say, for example, I'll turn to all of you, what is your most valuable asset as users? The most valuable asset to a betting operator is their license, because without the license, they have no users, right? So it's extremely important that you maintain that compliance. So AI, and it's still a bit rudimentary, but it's with anything we do, it's getting refined every single day, is used in compliance settings as well. Are you doing something that might be pushing you out of compliance in certain parts of the world? Betting is regulated very, very highly, and in North America, it's done at the state and Canada provincial level. which means that if you operate in the United States in more than one state, you have more than one legal and regulatory framework that you have to manage. So AI is used not just in terms of tracking compliance, but also ensuring that you fit within all of these different compliance frameworks. And then I'll move into the last element of this here. The number one priority for most of these compliance frameworks is consumer protection. So that includes most of what I already said, but it also includes the very, very important area of what you'll somewhat generically call responsible gambling. Responsible gambling is the concept of preventing harm. We talk about problem gambling, that comes up quite a bit. That's the moment where you're in harm already, where you're doing that, you need to seek help, you need to be able to access treatment where it's available. So more generically, one of the not more generically, but on the prevention side then, one of the major areas that AI has been a major contributor and was one of the most, or really was one of the first areas that we saw AI applied in the betting and gaming space is in tracking behavioral activity for anomalies that might be driving toward harmful activity for individuals. And that is, it's incredibly difficult to achieve. It's still sort of considered the holy grail. We have come a long way since the beginning. But even within that, to speak to something that Natalie said earlier, right? It's the humans in the loop concept. The hardest part of tracking human behavior for potentially, activity that might be driving you toward problematic play, that's actually the somewhat easy part. The hard part is then communicating that. How do you actually tell somebody you have a problem? Because if you do that, there's usually a few different outcomes that can happen. The first one is screw you. That's the most common response to you think that you might be going through problematic play. But you also want to make sure that you time this correctly. Because if you intercept somebody at the wrong moment, if they're not actually edging toward harmful or problematic play, you may be driving away a customer. And if they are, but they're not ready to seek help, you might actually push their help seeking further down the line. And so that's one of the major areas where data analytics has become incredibly important, is because it really helps with that timing element. And it also helps test out messaging around the communications element of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, without going too deep into it at this point, I almost need to send a note like to your mom, right? Kind of thing that you're headed down a bad path and to get the kind of response that you're hoping to get, but it's not there yet, right? Christina, you all are doing really, really cool work at MIT Sports Lab. What emerging technologies coming out of the work that you're doing at the lab do you think will have the biggest impact on fan engagement in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm sure we've all heard about the immersive external experience that the future fan's going to have. And we've got a number of sports teams concerned that it's going to be so good that folks aren't going to want to go to live events. I disagree. I think it's really hard to emulate the experience of all of those humans being excited at the same time. The roller coaster of emotions. That said, I think one of the things to think about with fan engagement really comes back to what we've all been talking about, is that personalization. And it's actually, we talk about it as big data, it is awkwardly medium-sized data. So what does that mean? It means you've got a few areas that you've got nice high resolution, and you've got a 60 to 70% of it that has to be thrown in because of questionable integrity, unclear how it was measured. Also, a lot of inconsistencies of that in it. This is where, on the fan side, you would think that pro basketball teams, pro baseball teams, like all of the sports know who their fan base is, you'd be shocked. So they don't know who's in the stadium.
Right, it's the number's like 40%, and that's good, like that's a bigger improvement.
That's exactly, and so, well, in marketing efforts, we capture all of that, right? Well, does an open rate actually help you better understand what the best personalized message is for someone who's 15, 25, 45, maybe my 65 demographic, where, so I think better understanding, so what we're continuing to hear is that, how do we better understand our future fan? And how do we understand our up and coming fan who will then convert to season ticket? The only reason I'm stepping back from the technology piece is if we put the human in the loop, if I can't afford to go to a Warriors game, can I afford to buy a VR headset and pay for the content, high probably subscription, because the content's expensive to produce, for that experience to be better in my living room? And then do I have enough people who are also gonna be in that with me? So I think if I was to say, I almost think we've got an opportunity to, sports has an opportunity to step back and just say, can we just better understand what the low hanging fruit is? And if I was to look actually in gaming, they've done a really good job capturing, being sticky on a platform. Now, how do we better understand what the sequence of events are that are leading to a higher engagement? The reason I mention that is this goes back to what can we do in stadium? What does that look like? And can we better understand who those folks are during the time? So I think we're gonna actually see more technology go into the smart stadium, smart venues, so that they can better understand who's in there when. Can I understand if my Saturday afternoon or evening games, are we driving families? Are we driving bachelor parties? What those are? And then can we customize the in-stadium experience? And so, you know, baseball has very rich season. So also those trade-offs, do I trade revenue for butts and seats? Essentially, because I want that energy there. And so I think we're gonna continue to see that, and I think finally, if I was to say, like, where do we see these future technologies? You have to have an infrastructure, a fairly technical groups who can also just maintain it. Right, so the easy part's the buying, the hard part is everything, all the infrastructure around that goes with calibration. Prop betting, I think is gonna be a big one in stadium. How many of you had a reliable Wi-Fi experience in stadium, right? And these prop bets have to go really quickly, right? So I think we're gonna see that, but we're also it's gonna have to be balanced with, can my user base, financially afford it? Does it make the broadcasters package, right? Those deals, that's where technologies are being used first. And can I better understand, is it infrastructure bottleneck or cost bottleneck, or am I just completely missing how my 14-year-olds who are gonna be my future fan base are consuming sports today? So I can give you a lot, yeah, sure, it's VR, AR is gonna come first, which is, can I, aim at a jersey and have unique insights that are coming up in stadium? But I also think we have to keep a mind towards, just because I have a drone, is me flying it through the stadium going to actually help or hurt what the experience is? The reason I mentioned this, I was at so DFB, who is the German football league. They did one of those actual I was gonna say real-time experimentation, that they're like, okay, we're gonna show you how incredible drone use can be in stadium. They had us all blocked off for safety. So we couldn't move around the stadium at all. Now imagine doing that in any type of stadium environment where we're already running into flow challenges. So I think that we're gonna see it more in the engagement from those owners who are trying to understand who they are. And then if we can better understand who they are, then we can actually use the technologies to optimize the engagement component.
Yeah, and to give everyone some perspective here, because most folks in this room, I'm making the assumption, have some pretty significant tech chops, right? And that is not necessarily what goes on with professional sports teams, right? And so to give you an example, about 6 years ago, I did a consulting project with a Major League Baseball team that owns its own stadium that had an IT department of 3.
That's not unusual.
Let that sink in for a second, of 3. And one was directly responsible for the president of the team's IT. He was his own personal help desk, right? So it was really the other 2 for everybody else. So then think about how much you're really gonna be able to do from a tech perspective with an IT department of 3, right? So speaking of baseball teams, we'll turn to Jorge. Jorge, we're asking you to divulge state secrets here. Can you share insights on how the New York Yankees are using AI to improve on-field performance, and to the extent that you're engaged in it, and so with respect to player performance, to the extent that you're engaged with the fan experience?
So I sort of wear a dual hat as a faculty and being involved with the Yankees. At a high level, I think with the Yankees, and just like any other sport, when you're trying to assess player performance, you want to make use of the big part of the data pie, which is really video. And there's a ton of video that's being collected by the Yankees and every other MLB sports team. And so the key, the main sort of job that I've had since I've been there has been trying to mine that data to provide more insights about player performance. And of course, within the quantitative team, that's really the perspective. There is this interesting thing as an academic to see that, historically it's had this strongly quant background to it. And we're moving into this future of way more data than any of these Bayesian models can handle, and frankly, for which the infrastructure is not ready for it. And so slowly our team has been growing on that front, and we've been really focusing on that. And I think, another challenge being part of the sort of AI and computer vision team there and leading that team is you don't always see the impact right away. Where you certainly extract more, new data sources from which new statistics are derived and everything else, and it's somewhere down the line getting baked into someone's decision, which at the end of the day could either get folded into a decision or dropped on the floor, right? And I think that's true in any situation where you have this much data and you're trying to synthesize it and figure out new stats. In terms of fan engagement, it's a completely orthogonal process to what we do. We don't think, at least I haven't seen us really, prioritize that in any way. It hasn't really come up in conversation. It's mostly about understanding frankly, the player is an asset and what are they capable of. I think there are a lot of really interesting technical questions because these are like, athletes represent the tail of the distribution in terms of human capabilities. And so really trying to pin that down, having a high level of accuracy and precision. We often have questions, and I bring this up all the time, like what's our ground truth, right? It's not very clear, but we do, like I said, a lot of other sports teams use the standard technologies, use the data feeds that we get from MLB. I think there is a lot of opportunities, if we were to somehow provide maybe aggregate statistics of some kind to fans. I think they would really appreciate that. I think in terms of, I've hinted at causality being something we should look into. And maybe someone in the department is working on it, but it hasn't been an explicit point of discussion.
Well, you bring up an interesting point though, it kind of chuckles around maybe causality, something we should look at. But you're taking, and it is kind of the modern take on the old school versus new school conversation that is largely past us in a lot of the kind of more traditional ways, but it's still there, right? But we think about then the storytelling for you. So what we're really focused on here. So you've generated probably some really interesting insights, right? On particular players and performance and things of that nature. But then translating that for the coach, for the manager, for the athlete is an entirely different story, right? And if you talk a little bit about the storytelling process, talk about humans in the loop, right? So how do you translate that?
I mean, there's like the first level of translation is literally going from I'm a computer scientist, I'm talking to statisticians. And so they think of the world as priors and hierarchical modeling where like everything is known, or at least you have like a very explicit assumption. And I say, no, we're like orders of magnitude past that in terms of the amounts of data that we now have. And so yes, we absolutely need those because those give you insight to decision making. But if you want to get it right, if you will, or maybe extract insights that there's no Bayesian model for which you're going to express a priori and learn something from, you really have to rely on these data sources that you have and build data-driven models. And that's been an ongoing conversation the entire time I've been there.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going back when some of my former colleagues have really been instrumental in UZR and range factor and kind of these new defensive metrics that are now, far more common. And the conversation was brought, the research had shown that Derek Jeter at that stage of his career was no longer a really good defensive shortstop. And they presented the material to Jeter, and Jeter's response publicly was, "Computer must be broke, man." Right? So getting the athlete to understand that, and then getting the athlete to again having the actionable insights, right, is really different. So concern about information overload, about impacting the athlete's confidence factor, things of that nature, particularly challenging.
Yeah, and it's I think, and there's new like LLMs are huge, right? They're everywhere. Even just having an LLM to serve as a way of potentially translating this information into like the tidbits of like the main takeaways of the results of the analysis, I think is something that's not utilized that we could. To be fair to the Yankees though, I am a huge Yankee fan and I've been with them for a long time. So while I'm very critical because I'm very critical, I'm a New Yorker. Yeah, so they have been moving in that direction. And there has been more interest. It feels like there's a momentum growing, and slowly through these conversations, both within the department and from the department to the coaching staff and the players and frankly the rest of the organization, it's slowly trickling in, but it's really a culture change.
Oh, for sure. Can you give an example of, and it could be generic, you don't need to tell us who the athlete is, right? But can you give us an example of something where you generated some insights through your use of AI that ultimately has been implemented by the club?
That's a hard one. Yeah, I have a hard time actually pointing to an example of something that we've discovered because it's so siloed.
Yeah, and it's interesting that that's not uncommon for that to be the phrase, like, oh, the Yankees are but they're not really doing it, right? It's really not. I mean, it's funny, early on, so think about 6-7 years ago, we'll time it, when the Miami Heat had both Shane Battier, who's very data-driven, statistically oriented player, and LeBron James playing for them. And one of the data points that came out was, hey, LeBron, every time this player who you're guarding in the upcoming game, 81% of the time, I think was the number, that this player gets the ball on a one-on-one on the left baseline, he drives left, right? And so he tells LeBron, Battier tells LeBron this, and the first time the guy drove by him, right? Okay, it was the 19%.
Unraveled all trust.
Absolutely, right?
You have one shot.
Well, that's it, right? And so he said something to him because he got dunked on, right? And everything. So the next time he's like, trust me, the next time he gets it, he's going to go left. And he did it again. The guy went left, right? And then he did it again, went left again. LeBron came with a block and a steal. And they came to the bench the next time out. I was like, hey, what else you got, man? Right? And so having the success rate, right, starts to impact things as well. So the humans in the loop. Right?
Can I just piggyback on
Please.
this? So, how many of you are working with pro sports or in sport? Awesome. How many times have you found a really unique insight and shared it with someone? You didn't ask for it and it went somewhere. That's amazing. So, because I think one of the big things that we find is sport is exceptionally conservative. You can explain away a loss if you've changed nothing. But you change one thing, you go for the 3 points, and you don't do it. I mean, it does not matter what the statistics say. You called it incorrectly. And now you are in the media for the next week. So, or you get fired, right? I mean, these are exceptionally public, conservative industries. And when I say industry, but they're owned by usually family. And so one has to also understand that in fan engagement, you've got more experimentation on the team side. You have a lot less wiggle room for what that has to get to. And usually it's when a team is not doing well, it forces. So we have an alum who's assistant manager at GM or and head of R&D for the Diamondbacks. They were not doing very well for a month. Anyone in baseball knows this. And he said, look, it had to get to that point for it to feel comfortable for the organization to actually make some big changes. And I think they're thinking about that as their fan base as well, because they don't want to lose anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to fail dumb than fail smart, right? In some ways, right? In the traditional way of thinking about sports. Right?
I wanted to add that when something is picked up, I think it gets really sticky. And speaking from a fan perspective, you know, obviously you're trying to optimize for the performance of your team. And so you come up with strategies, and it takes years for the coaching staff and everyone else to gain trust in those strategies, and then they implement them. But they implement them sometimes, for instance, in baseball, to the extent where the game got more boring. I mean, I know that I'm gonna wear my professor hat and my fan hat from that, but baseball was boring before they started getting really boring when they didn't have the clock and they were shifting all the time. It just wasn't fun. I would watch my favorite 80s and 90s clips on YouTube because those games were much more dynamic. They weren't shifting, it wasn't really clear. That uncertainty led to the excitement. Small shifts in the rules of the game completely changed the dynamic of the game, qualitatively. And it made the experience much more fun. My son, who's 10 years old, he was not interested at all in baseball, and now because of its pace, can sit and watch a few innings with me. He's not quite watching a full game, but he's getting there. And I think it's in large part because of the pitch clock and the lack of the shift, getting rid of the shift. I want to add something there. So I don't know if soccer is not very popular, but sometimes it can do the opposite as well, right? So in soccer, what happens is now the VAR, you know, where they do a action replay in real time to get the offside decisions, and soccer is a game which 90 minutes of action, you know, fans are used to it. And now with every decision, with every goal, all the players, everyone is like, every single goal is like checked, every single penalty call is checked, and they're like, look at the weight, the 1/10 of the shoe may be in an offside position that AI is, you know, it looks on television and AI is confused. And at the end of the day, just making a judgment call of, oh, you know what, I don't know about this one, but this is offside. But that kills it, right? Sometimes you can use AI technology to actually enhance and make it better, but it has a reverse impact on the viewers and the fan engagement.
Absolutely. Right.
And it's really interesting to hear this. First, I love when you said the uncertainty. That's really a bit more exciting, but of course it has. But this is such a great point with soccer and a great point with baseball in terms of the pace and the pitch clocks. You know, said shot clock there for a second. But there's really interesting applications of this in terms of the data flow and what that means for what we can do for live sport. I know you asked the question about live sport twice, so I'm going to address it now. So we see this a ton in betting and gaming spaces for things like prop betting. In-play betting is an often used term for this. Props can be done really at any point. Things like in-play betting, micro betting, prop betting, these are not unique, or they're not unique terms. There's overlap between all of these. These are low latency, high frequency bets. These are things that can be done. They can theoretically, they're not yet, but theoretically these can be automated. These systems can be automated. which eliminates, for those of you who are unfamiliar with sports betting operations, actually the terminology is quite similar to finance, which Dean Cheng mentioned earlier as an application for AI. Trading desks is the common term for sports betting operators, if you're unfamiliar, which makes it a lot easier in many ways and harder for trading desks to maintain the ability to provide this in the moment live betting opportunity or live engagement opportunity as we think about this through gaming. And what's interesting about some of these data flow situations is for such a long time, soccer, I give a lot of talks in Europe, so I'm great at football. Well, I'll say football, and we'll go with that. But with football, this was for such a long time considered to be a continuous flow sport. So when VAR was introduced, it threw a massive wrench into trading desks because we had finally gotten to a point where you're starting to see a lot of really interesting automation and things had to change. We started to see it, we think about sport with different transitions. I don't know how you feel about hockey here these days. We're still pretty keen on it in Las Vegas. But hockey, again, another one of those more flowing sports. Whereas when you talk about things like basketball, which was a great example from earlier, when we talk about things like baseball, we're talking about a lot of discrete instances that keep happening. The flow of data is very different than it is or was in a game like football. Or foosball, and when we think about it in this capacity, it means that we have to change some of the ways that we engage. We have to change some of the ways in which we offer some of these immediate engagement tools throughout the game itself. So when baseball started getting to be more of a flow, that also changed the way that we engage in real time. And we're still somewhat figuring that out. Again, I think this team made such a great point about there being so much data. And it's sort of funny to come from the gaming side of things and hear people compliment the stickiness.
Yeah.
Because in our field, we're like, oh God, nobody knows what they're doing. Just wonder what's happening over here. Why aren't you putting more people, right? 3 people comment
Right.
on this sort of area. Because this really is an area where fan engagement can just be amplified big time. Whether that's a betting product, whether that's a gaming product, even whether that's just an piece of information that you can share with a fan, this all becomes incredibly important in terms of how we're learning from the data we have and how that data itself is changing.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, again, you think about the fan experience, Christina, which you talked about before, and the fan experience in baseball from an accelerated game. So you think about the user experience in the stadium. So my first job in sports when I was a high school kid, I was a vendor at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia. So I'd walk around and sell soda and ice cream, right? During the games. Great, best high school job you could ever imagine, right?
Really no fan behavior.
Believe me, yes. So, but you would think about it, and so when you think about faster games for a vendor, then right? I mean, that's problematic. There's less time for you to sell. You're going to take a cut in your. It's commission based business, so you're gonna take a cut. What they found was fascinating, right? So far, the F&B actually has increased. Right, fans are more engaged. They're consuming more in a shorter period of time. Now, in some areas, alcohol that might be problematic, of course, right? But when you think about the overall engagement, it's much higher, even though you would think, given that the time is shorter, right, that you'd be spending less money when you're at the ballpark. So fascinating kind of insights that come from that, and some surprising ones, right, for sure.
I wanted to make one point. I think because AI is so great and technology has evolved so much, and we probably talk about revolutionizing everything, right? Fan experience, but there are a lot of baby steps that we can take to make things a lot better as well. Right? So I had gone to the Super Bowl game last year, and I think they gave us something to wear.
Yep.
Right? Which vibrated and had lights, and it's a very small application that's run in real time with the music, and that in the halftime show, it was a great
It
experience.
was really cool.
Right? Like the ability to go in and out of stadiums smoothly, the crowd control that happens as to which gates to direct based on, or a simple example of a pure sentiment analysis after a game. Which sections of the fans in a stadium had a good time? Which are the ones where like the view was not good, for example? So I think behind the scenes there's a lot going on using AI in small different ways in identifying that how can we make fans experience better, which probably doesn't come upfront in front of everyone because it's not like glamorous anyway. Because we completely think of that, oh, is how do we get like a VR set for everyone? This is $3,000 and give them that experience, right? But that's not the only way. You can do a lot more with technology, which is more affordable as well, right? And not just the glamorous things.
Yeah, so like the Portland Trailblazers right now, are a team that's really taking the lead on AI. In the NBA on the business application side of it, right? So one of the things they're doing specifically is with respect to customer surveys, where they've used AI to flag problematic responses, right, from fans who had a bad experience at the game and can, really then identify when it needs to be raised to a level of concern where it needs to be forwarded to someone in their customer service department to respond to that particular complaint. Now, there's a lot of teams that do a lot of survey work, and historically, they haven't had the resources to even read the surveys to turn them into actionable insights, right? So, I mean, that's a pretty remarkable development. Now, of course, fan surveys are a little bit, it's heavily impacted by whether or not the team won or lost, when they're doing well. So the beer is always colder and the hot dogs always are a little better. The game presentation about the team is always much higher when the team has won versus when they've lost, even though it's the identical thing, the identical product, of course. But that's a really important insight, I think, to take away where AI has been extremely helpful on that front, right?
Can I offer up two extreme use cases?
Please.
Every single pro sports team we've spoken to who's trying to optimize for the in-stadium experience, what do you think is the number one issue for their concern of how the fan experience is when going to a game, a match, whatever? Any guesses?
I'm trying to feed our athletic director the answer here. Parking.
You have now just optimized for the frosting in the middle of the Oreo cookie. But how much is it bookended by the hassle to get there? And then the hassle of leaving?
Yeah, ingress egress is the biggest thing.
Okay, if you guys resolve that, everyone will love you forever. But this is it seems like you should be, like, a VR headset will not solve that. It's interesting, so I would say for those who may not be in the field, don't hesitate to ask a lot of what you might think are dumb questions. Because we go in, me and my colleague go in, we say, please be patient with us, we're gonna ask you a lot of dumb questions. This is how we found out. Parking is the biggest challenge, right? And now you've got like fraudulent parking passes. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I can't even get my ride share card at the right place. That's a big one. But then if we kind of think about to where are the wins happening? Well, if we look at these younger audience, gaming is actually doing the best because they're providing small snippets of content that are asking for some level of interaction. And to my point, now my team's not just focused around one team. I might have 6 teams or essentially the entire lineup that I'm now following. I think there's a lot of interesting opportunity there to start to look at other fields like mobile games, which are exceptionally good at keeping people on the platform. And then it's free, and then you start buying tokens, right? So I think there's opportunities, sports media or these package deals start coming out, and you start to think about what are other ways to feed this future fan in the way that they're currently consuming. I ask my students all the time, how many of you are paying for cable?
What's key?
Anyone who raises their hand and said, is it your parent package? Yes. They're watching clips in short snippets and they're saying, I watched the game. That's the other thing. The verbiage itself is being applied to it. I'm trying to figure out what my future season ticket holder looks like. But I have to work way backwards, and I can't assume that the way I'm selling today is gonna get me the same type of result. And I think that's where I'm really interested is personalized content in a small format. And I think there could be a really interesting opportunity to take away the $80 monthly subscription fee that I'm not gonna buy at as a college student likely, and look at all of the free content and find ways to then maybe have that at a higher resolution, a little bit more unique, but then find smaller ways to pay for it.
Yeah, and these people in the overlays of statistics on the games, like for example, there are fantasy sports platform, and if you like created a league for a game, and when you're watching it on the mobile phone and you see your scores, your ranks, go up and down, it's just like a very different experience than just sitting on a television and just not like people need to be interactive. Right? So if you give them that experience on mobile phone, you can do so much more. Like with the prediction capabilities, what's gonna happen next. So some examples like how you've seen these sports when they're trying to do a field goal, like what is the probability of you hitting it or not. It just keeps the engagement going throughout the game as well. So that passive viewing, and that's what fantasy sports also kind of solve, right? That passive viewing of games with nothing to do is like, I don't think usual people want that anymore. They need a lot more engagement, and that's where these everyone like from APs of the world, everyone is investing in those apps, right? How do we make the apps to become a lot more engaging? How do we create a connect with the user from our fans and understand them a lot better, and then use technology to actually sell them things or get them more immersed into experiences, etc.
Yeah, I mean, I remember having a conversation years and years ago with a senior executive from the NFL when fantasy football was really taking off. And the phrase was very simple and straightforward. And when I remember, he's like, "This is like manna from heaven for us, right?" And so the engagement level is just so much higher. And then obviously with PASPA, being overturned, and then you have the the legalization of sports betting outside of Nevada and across the 50 states, leading up to the states to do so, even more so, right? Because gambling is in many ways like fantasy sports on steroids, right? If you think of it in that context, right? So, Brett, one of the things that we talked about, though, this is not all great, right? So we talk about micro betting and a lot of the issues, how quickly it needs to be done and everything else, and some of the fraud issues and integrity issues that come with it. But there's another side to the micro betting issues in particular, and that's the impact on player mental health. And sometimes physical health, but really mental health. If you could talk a little bit about that, just to inform the audience of it.
I know that I did say if you pranked me on this, I would talk about it for a while, so,
We can put a pitch clock on it.
Exactly. So in particular, one of the areas that Scott and I had talked about earlier is player abuse. But before I talk about that, Scott, you actually framed this question in a really ideal way, because you generically talked about players. And so here I'm going to talk about not just the players, the athletes, but also the players, those who are buying the tickets, those who are placing the bets. And in particular with micro betting, I want to point out, I just spent, 5 minutes talking about how engaging this is, how important it is, how great it is to be able to have this live, interactive, engaging tool. Well, it turns out, framed it perfectly, Scott, micro betting is also one of the highest risk bets that is possible when it comes to predicting problematic play. So you have both the highest engagement, but it turns out that the highest engaged bettors are also those who might be more prone to problems. So that's something you always need to keep in mind. When we talk about engagement, there's a cap on how engaging you want to be, especially when you're talking about incorporating any sort of risk product. You can talk about that in terms of risk management. That's the very common business phrase that might be used. You can talk about it in terms of harm prevention. That's the more public health or psychology phrase that might be used. You could talk about it in terms of compliance. That would be your law and regulatory space. Same concept. Whatever you want to do when you engage any sort of tool that has risk involved with it is it's a balance. You have to make sure that you're optimizing what you offer to everybody who plays in a healthy capacity, while also limiting the capacity for any sort of harm. It's extremely difficult. You will never get it optimal because humankind is a risk-taking being. That's part of the human in the loop piece here. But that's an incredibly important piece to keep in mind. Moving then to the player side, athlete side of this player abuse, is one of the things that we've seen as this very big growth in in-play betting has risen is player abuse. Somebody, it's not just betting on the outcome of the game, like we talked about, right? It's betting on individual moments within the game. So let's say I bet on a field goal. Doesn't matter which sport, we'll just go with the field goal as a whole, and it misses. I go online and I say, oh, screw, I'm gonna kill you. Next time I see you, you lost me. And I've seen everywhere from $5 to $5,000 or more. That's it. You're dead. Next time I come find you. These are real, these death threats are very real. Bullying as a whole is very real. And this is something that's incredibly important to think about because these are all both data generated types of activities, the human piece of it, of course, or data's not telling people to write these things. But there also are ways to use data to look at what might be happening, to identify some of these threats before, hopefully, they even get to the athlete themselves. I'll also note, this is not a solved problem. If you're looking for something to work on, maybe you're a student looking for a project that you want to use to apply for the next round of Dream Fellowships. Prevention of athlete abuse is an incredibly valuable thing that needs to be solved because it's incredibly harmful, not just for the individual who's the victim of this bullying and abuse, but also the bully themselves. We need to find out who this person is. We need to be able to punish them. And we don't really have a good mechanism for that yet. There are certain reporting structures in place. You might complain to the compliance director underneath the athletics director, but even that's not solving the problem. That's identifying it after the fact. So one of the major areas in which AI can help is identifying and predicting where that kind of behavior might come from. And again, not a solved issue yet, something to be done in the future.
So we actually don't have that much time left based on the clock that I'm looking at. We've only got a few minutes. So again, feel free, students now, if you have others to chime in with questions. But with students present, always curious and when they hear career advice kinds of pieces. So first, I read a statement recently that AI is not going to replace you, right? Someone using AI will. Jorge, what is your thought with respect to that specific comment? True, false?
Absolutely. Yes. As LLMs do more and more these days, and generative AI in general, they're not perfect, obviously. They're certainly getting a lot better. But the human in the loop in that process is really, really important. Providing that feedback, providing that level of judgment. I think there's something very subtle, two things that are very subtle there. One is that because they produce such good content, both from a coding perspective, from a writing perspective, and everything else, non-experts become overly reliant on them because you're just trying to finish all your assignments or a deadline or whatever. But the mistakes that it makes are very, very subtle, and I think it's fundamental to how they're trained. Right? They're trained specifically to model whether you will think it's a good answer. And so obviously they're sort of obfuscating bad answers, and that makes it very difficult to work with them. That's an open problem in AI within machine learning. So I do think that when used correctly, you can increase your productivity by anywhere from a factor of 2 or 3 to an order of magnitude.
It's interesting. Our students right now are in an esports workshop, right, for a couple of days. And I was talking to the person running it before and telling them why I wasn't going to be there today. And he's like, a lot of my clients are using AI to replace the coders, right? And there are literally the work of one person with AI is replacing 9 coders, right? So literally a 90% reduction in the number of coders that they are hiring.
Wow. So what I will say is, it's an excellent tool for code, where my students are actively using it to be like, is this the best optimization approach? But I also have students who are like, oh yeah, no, I'm way past what that can offer me. And so, to the point that was just made, if you don't know what's coming out of it, you have to, that in, amplified worse out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure.
And the internet is not perfect. Right? That's what it's sampled.
Yep.
And so I don't know if I actually want to make decisions off of everything I've seen on the interwebs. This is where the, training on your own internal data, the other piece is you better make sure that you've got a team that you're throwing at making sure you're ingesting the right stuff, because everything is going to be built off of that for the future of the organization. I think LLMs have huge potential. It is advancing faster than we have seen any other technology. It's amazing. I did a workshop in sport for this. I was working with some students. We were planning it. 2 days later, we went back to check results, and all of the models had already changed. 2 days. So I think the key there is they're changing fast. If you don't know how to interpret them, and you don't know what's been changed, and you don't know the references, I'd say buyer beware. I think our job is to create or start to teach a different way of critical thinking. And if you're making financial decisions or performance decisions off of these, I'd say buyer beware.
The upshot that New York Times had a great visualization of garbage in, amplified garbage out. I think it was like a week or two ago, that was really a fantastic look at what can happen if you just let it keep learning off of the bad data and how high that will go.
I had a comment with the coders thing. So as I said earlier, right, I always feel I'm less engineers.
Yeah.
Right. So I have 300. I need a lot more. This has been discussed, right? Like, okay, you know what? I'm expecting at some point I'll be asked, like, do you really need so many engineers with GenAI? Why don't you cut them down, right?
Right.
But on the other hand, if your engineers are only looked as coders, then that's a problem, right? Coding is like a very basic, bare minimum qualification of like translating what you think into a language and telling, like, to be honest. And so that's why I think some of these statements can be like, oh, your engineering teams are going to shrink and then there'll not be any jobs. I'm like, I mean, personally don't believe. I think the value is to win.
So with respect to, a question that I get all the time in different contexts, not with respect to AI, but what are the AI skill sets that are the most important as you think about new hires?
So I think basic machine learning, right? I think for us, it's like we hire a lot of people, and we still think that majority of the use cases that we have solved, that we're working on right now, and I think my team is here, they can share more, but can still be solved by traditional techniques. But the idea is to how to use these LLMs to actually specialize. So for example, an area that we really want to specialize in and build something is the sports LLM. So the idea is like we are looking for people now that who can take this and understand this technology, and then how do we fine tune in building something that is very specific to the use case that we want, where all the pitfalls of engineering and go here, I didn't trust it enough to do what I want to power the use cases. Like for example, in maybe fantasy sports, you want to create a team. You need all the statistics. It's a perfect use case, right? I think with the sports LLM, you can go and you can talk, you can get all the information that you need. So I think someone who can like take the technologies out there, build on top of it, and take us in the direction where we're going. I think that's where we look at how I see things.
Yeah, that's part.
I think for engineers in general, obviously we all think critical thinking skills are very important, and they are, and that's what we emphasize, but communication, right? Many of the engineers I interact with, from PhD level to undergraduates to folks I work with out, the Yankees and other organizations, don't have very good communication skills. So they're not, with an LLM, you have to be very explicit about what you're looking for, and sometimes provide examples of what you're not looking for. And that's actually, as an advisor, one of the things we do when we're training our PhD students, like how do you communicate results effectively? How do you talk about the things that you think are novel or important or whatever? All of those skills are very, very important in interfacing with this technology.
This has been the biggest one we've seen. It doesn't matter how good the insight is, if you can't communicate it to whoever is sitting in that room, then it's a non-starter. And I think one of the things that we really lean into is actually training that piece of it, because ultimately, you don't need a fancy technique if you can't communicate it. The other is the ability, the best teams I've seen, I've been in the room where the draft model, the latest iteration of the draft model is coming through. What the team did well was speak to what was, 30 around what was, 30 around what was changed, where the model was weak, and then with the scouts, with the GMs, with the owner in the room, said, give us feedback, but they had clarity around, we've listened to what this group needs, and you could think of this on the fan engagement side as well, because you've got your sales team, you've got your third-party vendors who have a certain amount of tickets that are going out, you've got facilities, you've got community engagement, you've got, merch, sponsorship. So who's in that room and then what do they all care about? And I think the communication aspect in sport is even kind of a higher need than other traditional industries that I've worked with.
And my answer was also communication, but I think that's been pretty thoroughly covered, so I'll add one more small piece, which is the student who did the chaos theory talk still here? Did they have to leave? No, looks like it's leave. In the world of gaming and betting, we love stochastic modeling. That's the literal nature of what this thing looks like. So if you've got, if you are into chaos and chaos theory, that's a skill set that becomes incredibly valuable, and data assimilation skills are fairly valuable. And what's really interesting about that too, is it's not even necessarily something that I think a lot of the businesses in this space know they want. So if you have that skill and you can communicate that you have it, why it's important, you're just a golden ticket to most businesses in that space.
I saw an audience question.
Please.
On the question of students using LLMs, writing code and then what skills one may be looking for in a place where the AI is in use, what kind of skill sets are required, right? To give you context, I've been working in low latency, high frequency trading for the last 20 years, deeply in the technology stack, and very recently, last 3-4 years, using AI techniques with the alternate data. And throughout the day, I'm seeing a lot of parallel between use of data for driving decision here and then what I do in my job. So what I've started seeing is that it's my take is, at least that's advice I give to my son who recently graduated, just started working on Wall Street, that if you want to rely too much on LLM for generating code, now coding is the one which gives you the depth when you code by hand, when you do mistakes, when you are correcting, debugging and all those things. That's when you develop depth of understanding of the system. Now, if the students are in too much rush to have the LLM right, my suspicion is that, they will find it they would find themselves lacking the experience needed to solve big problems. And as far as skill sets on the AI side, what I'm seeing is that a lot of students are able to put together quick POCs. However, when it comes to productionization, you want to run that at large scales consistently, day after day, minute after minute. I'm seeing, 5-10 years back, the kind of young folks I used to get versus what I'm getting now. Some of the experience is lacking, and there's a rush to develop POC very quickly because you can do it with an LLM. So that's the play I'm seeing, so that was my observation. But one question I have for the group is that in the field of asset trading, right, on the low latency trading, in the last 20 years, a lot of innovation happened on data warehousing techniques, data representation, data collection, cleaning, and all that thing. So I'm curious under the hood, what's happening in this space? Is it standard, or is every company doing ad hoc? And how are they doing data quality, consistency, and what's the size of the problem? I'll be curious to hear that. Yeah.
Who wants, I see a lot of chuckling up here. Who wants to handle this
Yeah,
one? Jorge, go ahead.
it's definitely, I mean, it's ad hoc, it's based on, at least the way we've done it, I think it's sort of grown organically based on the needs and the workload and everything else. You know, over the years that I've been with the Yankees, we're starting to see a transition in sort of acceptance that the workload is changing and that we still want to support old workloads while supporting the ones that we see coming down the pipeline. Right, so, but everything's getting designed in-house, and in some cases, you know, wherever we need it, we certainly bring in expertise, either through hires or through contracts with external companies, but certainly it's, you know, there's some stuff that's provided that's been standardized for Major League Baseball, for instance, and every team has that. And how we incorporate that in-house is really a question of, you know, the questions we want to answer, how quickly we want to answer them.
Yeah, and I would say, and to piggyback off of that, one of the, just kind of from the skill set aspects, so data science, is very different than software engineering. And so when we did our work with FIFA, which our work was in the World Cup, I told them 18 months out, we have to get this into the wild and break it before we continue to optimize. Because I don't know what I don't know, and let me tell you, the World Cup is gonna be all sorts of things that I don't know. Let me give you an example. We did 9 live tests and tournament events. We lost a whole half day of data because of what? In brand new, this was the Arab Cup, brand new Qatari stadiums. First day, half day of matches gone. Why? Storage is definitely a challenge. The internet. Brand new facilities, we had it, we tested before, but it wasn't until it was at meeting that level of robustness
Right, of course.
and load. And so, again, this kind of goes back to the, you know, our, yes, we've got quite a few of our students go into quant trading and, you know, running those books. Those techniques are perfect for sport, but I think this other piece is what's wrong with me? So I would say the finance data is usually is what it is. It's pretty solid. The collection from sports data, I think the critical mind of having that ability, so it's not just critical, it's like, what is wrong with it? What doesn't make sense in, you know, the physics of Earth, right? Or what I would expect common behavior to take place. And can I understand that? And then can I bring in the right skill set to then make a product out of it that is going to run in an environment that I can't go touch all the time, that I'm not going to be tweaking all the time, that needs to be able to be updated. And so we hand those things off because it's a different skill set. And I would say this is where the teams are having challenges. Like, do I put my resource into a headcount for the infrastructure I'm going to need just to ingest it, structure and ingest it? Then can I make sure I'm still doing all the scouting reports and all of the potential, you know, scouting happen in DR and now who I've pulled up from the minor. So I would say if you're running on 3 people, you kind of need more of what is happening over here, the 300.
So, it's just that the funny thing is like some of the challenges that I hear about a very small team I face similar challenges with. There are a lot more people, right? So for us also, I think we were on Google Analytics when we like a few years ago, and then when so the Indian market is different. The number of customers are like always going higher scale, right? So when we have such high concurrent users and all, we couldn't scale. Most of the times, what happens is like we end up being on a platform or a B2B platform that doesn't scale for us. So then we have to build completely in-house. But I think in the software engineering space, we've been very fortunate. The big data space is a lot of work has been done by the FANGs of the world, you know, open source models, and then even the cloud providers, the managed services out there, they kind of make your job, or it used to be piggyback on that a lot. But at the end of the day, like you mentioned data quality, I don't think there's anyone who will say that I don't have data quality problem. Okay. So everyone does. Yeah. You're here, right? And so we done like 50 terabytes of data every day. We have like 20 to 30 petabytes of data over the last 10 years of our users and playing patterns that you're excited about, right? So, but yeah, not getting value out of that. What is the 80% of that? How do we use it still or not? Hopefully, we'll unlock the potential at some point, and especially working with Columbia. Everyone at Columbia is like, you know, I want to be right.
I think you should end this talk with giving all of the problem statements that you'd like them to solve.
Now that's homework, right?
This
For sure.
this is very exciting for me because I don't always get to say, oh, guess what, betting's actually doing really well. But guess what, betting's actually doing really well. Is like financial data. Again, because betting is such a highly regulated industry, this is a space where regulation has forced data quality. It's not necessarily great. Again, same thing. You're never going to hear anybody say, I have no data quality problems. That's a great statement, by the way. We're use that one. But it is, because it has to be reported in many, many instances, it's forced to be cleaner in many ways than you might get from just the sports organization itself that underpins the betting data that's associated with it. The other area, and I'm so excited because just as we're about to close, I finally get to bring up esports and digital games. Hooray! Which is that this is incredibly rich, incredibly robust data that is generated by the server as the game is played. So you can draw that data directly from the server in its natural format, which you can then put into whatever setup you want. The investment by especially AAA game developers who invest in esports, because not all of them do, and indie game developers who have a vested interest in esports, their investment into data companies in particular is very, very valuable. And a lot of these, we're kind of reaching an inflection point because this question was asked earlier on open data. For those of you who, particularly those of you who are computer science, whether it's majors or researchers, et cetera, who have the ethical obligation as academics in this space to provide your data in addition to your open code, there are a lot of open data sets within digital games and esports that are available. I don't usually plug specific companies, but I have an example, so I'll use it right now, which is Grid Esports. This is a company that generates data. Again, it's what one might call official data. It's generated directly from the game servers. It is actually a company that's partially owned by Riot Games. So for those of you who are looking for particular applications, they make some of their data open access, and it is specifically game generated data. It is not data scraped from broadcast feed. It is data that is engine data direct from the game itself. So there are some incredible data quality opportunities in esports. And it's actually one of the few areas where we get to say esports can teach sports instead of the other way around, which is a more common phrase. We've done the same thing before.
All right. Well, I want to thank everyone. I think we're actually a little bit over the time, but I want to thank everyone, Jorge, Christina, Brett, Amit, for the conversation. I learned a tremendous amount. I hope you all did too. And thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you.